Hey all, hope all is well. This is another video in the Road to Grandmaster series. If you've followed the last few, you've noticed that I've had a few draws lately. Actually, more than a few. I've never had 4 draws in a row, so I was a little bit frustrated in the past few games, like not being able to get over the hump and get a victory. But unfortunately, that was just kind of the way the tournament rolled for me. Now. I am playing in a pretty strong event, the Charlotte GM IM Invitational. So there's only Grandmasters and IMs playing in this one, and sometimes wins don't come as easy as they would in open events. So that's just the way it is when you get higher up the ladder. It's harder to get wins. In any case, my opponent in this 5th round game was Andrey Stukopin, a Grandmaster from Russia, I believe, might be Ukraine, but I think it's Russia, that goes to one of the chess universities, if you will. If you've seen one of the earlier games, I already played one such individual, Vladimir Belis, and Andrey Stukopin is another one of these guys. I think he goes to one of the schools in Texas. But in any case, very, very strong player and still pretty active, so it was going to be a tough challenge. So anyways, I was black, white opened with e4. I played e6. A little bit of a surprise. I was hoping for Stukopin. It's not like normally what I do, but d4, d5, knight c3, knight f6. I'm kind of inviting the classical French here. If they go e5, then I can go knight d7, and then f4, c5, and this is just a line. My opponent after in this position after knight f6 went for bishop g5, which is kind of probably one of the more sharper lines you can go for, and I followed it with bishop b4, which is the McCutcheon variation. I did actually play a McCutcheon before at the Bay Area International, my last tournament, and that was my first time ever playing the McCutcheon, and it actually went well. So I decided to try it out again. Thing is, it's a very, very sharp line, so you kind of have to be on your P's and Q's. So anyway, after e5, which is the main move, I went h6. The point is that I have to, deal with this pin somehow, so you pretty much challenge the bishop. Note that e takes f6, I can play h takes g5, and this position, even though my king can't castle, I do have the bishop pair, and it's thought to actually be quite playable for black. So white players don't really go for e takes f6. They usually move the bishop away, and he actually went for a move I had not really looked at extensively, which was bishop c1. I must confess, this was a little bit frustrating. I'd actually looked at bishop e3, I looked at bishop d2, but I did not look at bishop c1. And bishop c1 is a pretty perplexing move because you think, why are you totally pretty much undeveloping your piece back to the original square? Well, there's some merits there where it's not as much of a target on c1 as it would be on d2. Note that the line that I was thinking about after bishop d2, the bishop is kind of hit right away, and with c1 that's not the case. So that's one of the nuances there. I'm not going to go too deep into the nuances, but that's one of the nuances. So anyway, bishop c1, I kind of need to go forward with my knight, so I went knight e4 anyway. And then queen g4 happened. And yeah, I mean, there's always two things you can do when queen g4 comes at hitting the g7 pawn. You can either push the pawn to g6, or you can tuck your king to f8. And I decided in this position I was going to go king f8. I think both moves are kind of playable, but I thought that this bishop c1 move was a little bit unusual, so I figured maybe he'd kind of looked at g6. And my other rationale was in the line where the bishop goes to d2. Let me back up for a second. In the line where the bishop goes to d2, typically the dark square bishop actually gets traded off very quickly. And so playing this g6 move is actually not as much of a big deal as it is when the bishop on c1, because there's no dark squared bishop to take advantage of some of these dark squares. They are still weak, but there's just no dark squared bishop. Whereas in the line in the game, if you actually see after bishop c1, if I go for g6 here, you can see that this bishop on c1 is still in the game. So it maybe doesn't make so much sense to weaken those dark squares with the bishop still present. So that was one of my rationale for king f8. So anyways, king f8, knight g2. Interesting move, I think, just reinforcing the knight on c3. And I played c5. I thought that, okay, again, the normal play on the McCutcheon is to trade on c3, but the point is playing knight takes c3 right away doesn't really seem to give me that much. I wasn't impressed by it after b takes c3, or even knight takes c3, honestly. It just doesn't seem like I should trade right away. So I played c5, and now white played a3, and this was what I was kind of thinking about is, okay, if my bishop on b4 is actually challenged, then I might consider taking, but at least white had to waste a tempo with a3. The other element, though, is that now the position that kind of came out of a knight f6 French kind of takes on the form of a winnower, because, you know, in many of these lines, you might see a white pawn capture on c3, having the double pawns, black losing the bishop, and then white playing on the queen side while black plays white playing on the king side while black plays on the queen side. So it actually looks kind of like a winnower. I played bishop a5 because I wasn't sure. I wasn't so confident in the winnower type of positions, so I thought at least this might be like a sideline of a winnower. Because again, now it very much looks like a French winnower. So, anyways, bishop a5, d takes c5. I expected this, and now I took on c3. Knight takes c3, knight takes c3, bishop takes c3, and b takes c3. And why am I giving up the bishop pair, do you ask? Well, my rationale was that I'd be able to target white's triple pawns here, and I thought maybe even the e5 pawn might be a target, so I thought all those pawns might be potential targets. And I thought if I'm in time to develop, maybe my structures holds up in the long run. The issue with this, again, is that white has the two bishops, and my king is on f8. So I kind of have to be fast with developing and getting things going, because if I don't, I'm going to be in trouble. Unfortunately, here I think I started with a mistake right away, which was this move, knight d7. I was very, very frustrated when I saw white's reply, queen d4. The reason for that is I thought knight d7 was a clever move because I'm targeting e5 and c5 at the same time. But the issue is I kind of just overlooked this queen d4 move. I was kind of looking at other moves that protect the e5 pawn, like, I don't know, like queen g3 or even bishop f4. I was just looking at all these other possibilities. And after queen d4, I haven't actually recovered any of the pawns, and I wasn't a huge fan of this. So it really bothered me. Alternatively, if I played queen c7, I think that would have been a little bit more to the point, because now I'm attacking both pawns with my queen, and if you have the same response, queen d4 like before, now my knight can go to c6, and I hit the d4 queen with tempo, and I recover e5, and I think black has a very playable position. So I was kind of frustrated by that knight d7 miss. After queen d4, I went queen c7 now, and now white played c4. And this is the key difference, is that white is ripping open the center before I'm really ready for it, and I haven't yet recovered one of the pawns. I played d takes c4, but note that if I take this pawn, let's say I play knight takes e5, well, unfortunately that runs into bishop b2, and this diagonal is very loose, and this g7 pawn is loose. Not to mention c takes d5 is on tap. And again, if I play knight takes c5, well then c takes d5 again, and my structure's kind of being ripped open a little bit. I didn't know, I think white would be better here. So unfortunately, I missed this important detail, and yeah, it is what it is, because now after knight e7, queen d4, queen c7, and now c4, I have to take on c4, and again, I have not recovered my pawn yet. So white played bishop takes c4, and now I went knight takes c5, but you can see now that the d file is open, my king is still stuck on f8, White might even consider queen d6 check at some point, just trading the queens and opening up this diagonal for the bishop. And I wasn't feeling this position at all. After bishop e3 is played, I played b6, reinforcing that knight. My only hope is to kind of get my bishop on a diagonal, walk my king over to h7, and then get my rooks connected. And I think you've heard me say this before if you've watched a few of my videos. The side that connects their rooks first is usually the side that wins the game. I see it all the time. And you can see it's going to take me some time to make that happen. So anyways, b6, castles. White's rooks are already connected. Kind of discouraging for me. Bishop b7, rook fd1, and now rook a c8. Note that I really wanted to play king g8, but I was a little bit worried about a move like queen d6 kind of infiltrating, so I thought I'd play rook c8 prophylactically first. Queen d6 is also an option here, but again, I just thought it was smart to reinforce my queen first. So rook c8, a4, and a4 is another move I just underestimate, and I think it's a pretty decent move. Basically just undermining my pawn chain with on the queen side with a5, loosening up my pawn chain, and maybe even this white rook actually takes over and seizes the a file. I would hate for a rook to land on a7 after a subsequent exchange, so it's just a very uncomfortable position. So I went king g8, trying to scramble to get my king over there, hoping that my queen side doesn't collapse in the interim. a5 was played. And now I went king h7, kind of just still trying to shuttle my king over. And for the first time in the position, I thought I was almost hanging in there. Another move which I thought about was actually bishop e4. I thought this was the move I really wanted to make. And I was a little bit concerned after a takes b6, a takes b6, bishop a6. This is actually something I calculated that really bothered me, because I was concerned about positions where if like knight takes a6, I was like worried about opposite colored bishop positions, where this might be something I should worry about. I don't know why, but maybe that I was a little bit wary here. And then I thought maybe, okay, after knight takes e6, maybe rook takes a6 isn't best, but queen takes e4, and this knight on a6 is hanging, and it just felt like my position is very loose, and these rooks are playing on the open files. Now, it might not be as bad as I thought, but it was something I was concerned about. So in an ideal world, I really did want to go bishop e4, but I went king h7 instead. So a takes b6, a takes b6, bishop d3 check. I was very surprised by this move, because I thought now I kind of get to an opposite colored bishop endgame, and my rooks are connected. But it's kind of a clever move from a practical standpoint. The point being that now my rooks are connected, I'm threatening rook d8, right? So if I get rook d8 in, I have this really nice bishop on the long diagonal. My knight has an outpost for now, and this e5 pawn could potentially be weak, you know? So all those factors mean white has to hurry and be very quick to disrupt me. And so bishop d3 does do that job. The point is that I don't really want to play g6 because that weakens my king side, and I don't want to go back because then my rooks aren't connected. So I exchange this bishop, but after queen takes d3 check, I again have the same problem, and I don't want to move my king back to g8, so I kind of choose the lesser evil, which is g6. But now, from a practical standpoint, my king is extremely weak because, first of all, if a rook ever comes to this 7th rank, my king is very loose. And second of all, you can see these dark square weaknesses. I've lost the integrity of the dark squares on the king side. So kind of a problem. So g6, white actually went back with queen d4, and I went rook hd8. Now, my point with rook h8 is I see that the queen is going to swing over, but it just didn't make sense to try and hold this pawn because there are too many entry squares on the king side. Like, even if I move for a move like h5, white can consider going queen f4 and queen h6 like that. And again, if a queen lands on h6, a bishop lands on f6, that's checkmate. So my idea was one of the pieces is going to get on to one of those dark squares. I'm going to try and bring my other pieces into the center and get counterplay. So rook h8, queen h4, rook takes d1 check, rook takes d1, and I went queen takes c2. I said, you know what, that h6 pawn is gone, take it. And after king g8, I figured, you know what, if this bishop doesn't have time to make it to the f6 square, if this dark square bishop does not have time, I probably will hold the game. That was my rationale. It was a little bit harder in practice, but I thought I would hold this because now white also has to contend with dark square problems. So rook e1 was played. I went rook d8. Again, trying to reduce the material, deal with white's back rank issues, and thinking that maybe I'm close to a draw here. h3, very good move, and a move I underestimated a little bit because I thought that after rook d1, which did happen, rook takes d1, queen takes d1, and king h2, I figured that I was relatively close to a draw here because I had opposite-colored bishops. I thought my queen could threaten checkmate with queen f1 here, and I thought, you know what, I'm right there. And this bishop doesn't really have time to get to f6. And I thought, hey, maybe this b-pawn becomes a runner. So I thought that would be enough distraction for this to probably be about equal. It turns out it's not so easy. I went queen h5 trying to trade the queens and nudge the black queen off the square. But what I realized was that after queen f1, the move I was thinking about playing initially, white can just go f3. And all of a sudden my bishop on b7 is blunted, and there's not really much counterplay to speak of here. And you might think, oh, maybe you could sacrifice, but this is not enough. First of all, white does have e5 pawn still, but even if the e5 pawn was gone, it would still be just a technical task for white, I think, because this h pawn is on the right color square, so for the bishop. So even in positions where white just has the h pawn, it actually is probably winning. So yeah, just the thing is, my bishop can be blunted, and unfortunately, white's bishop can get to that square with some time. So problematic. The other thing I realized that kind of dawned on me is, let's say f3. Let's say I want to play a move like b5 and get my pawn up the board. Now all of a sudden the bishop can come this way with bishop c5, and all of a sudden there's also nasty threats with queen f8 and queen takes f7, and yeah, just not at all what I wanted. So that was kind of the problem, is that all of a sudden I didn't have any direct way to equalize. So I tried queen h5, trying to trade queens. White, of course, declined with queen f4. And then I went queen f5, and we are sort of engaging in this tango. But now queen g3 is an excellent move, firmly nestling the queen on g3 and like kind of just stopping me from trading the queens. And now I have to make some tough decisions because, again, it's very difficult to defend here with my king kind of being a sitting duck. This pawn on b6 is kind of loose. And now white might even introduce h4, h5 ideas at some point. Also recognizing that f3 might also be in the cards to blunt the bishop. So all these factors make it very unpleasant. So queen d3 was played. I played queen d3, trying to at least pin the bishop, frustrate white a little bit. White played queen h4. And now I went queen e4, trying to trade those queens still and threaten mate on g2. Queen d8 check, king h7, and queen g5. And again, I'm not getting the simplification I want. And queen g5 does the really important job of protecting the mating threat and guarding the bishop so that white is preparing f3. So I went queen f5 again, queen g3, and now b5, trying to get my own counterplay going. But maybe I took a little bit too long to do this. White played bishop g5, and now you can see there's some serious problems because now there's bishop f6, queen h4, and queen h8 is a serious threat on my king. And again, the queens are not being traded right now. My queen can't even get onto the dark squares. If you notice, all these dark squares are well covered by black, or by white. So I'm in some trouble here, and It's just tough position. I went queen e4, at least trying to stop the queen h4 direct threat. And white went f3. That was expected. And then I went queen d4. The point was, again, that I'm still at least eyeing the h4 square for now, also keeping an eye on the e5 pawn. But bishop f6, I did expect this, and now you can see the bishop is in this really, really nasty mating position for me. Just terribly, terribly strong, and I have to routinely worry about a piece getting to g7 or to the h file for that matter. So I went b4 trying to get some counterplay going, and now white went h4, and this is where I was pretty clear to me that this was going to be a really tough position to hold, because now I don't even have time. Excuse me, I don't have time to put my pawn up the board. The threat is h5. I can't take it because of queen g7 mate, and then h takes g6, f takes g6, and queen h3 check. And then that's the square, the h3 square, where white can potentially invade on the h file. I went queen e3, kind of trying to eye this square to prepare for this onslaught. But after bishop g5, I'm pushed off the square, and I went queen d3. Again, trying to still keep an eye on the king side a little bit, and maybe considering to shuttle my pawn home. At least from d3, I'm holding b1. White now played queen f4 and switched tact. Very, very strong move. The point being that now the bishop has vacated the f6 square, but now the queen can come in there, and it also attacks the b4 square. So very tough position for me to deal with. I went queen f5 to try and block there, and now white went queen d4. Excellent move. Note that taking on b4 would not make a lot of sense because I'd just take this pawn, and now that my queen is on this diagonal, I don't have to deal with the same type of tomfoolery on the dark squares, and I should hold this really easily. So queen d4 just says, you know what, I'm still trying to come around, and this b pawn isn't going anywhere. So here was kind of my moment, I think, to try and get something going. And the thing was that I was also pretty down on time, and this is what happens when you're defending for a long time. Sometimes you just crack. And I was really trying to make bishop takes f3 work, because I thought, okay, this might be my one opportunity to rip open the position and maybe get a perpetual check. But I just couldn't do it. Now, bishop takes f3 should have been played. I just didn't see a perpetual, and so I didn't play it. But after bishop takes f3, g takes f3, queen takes f3, and queen f4, I do have some checks. I can start with queen e2. The king has to move. I could throw in another check. Throw in another check. And now the king has to run, because if queen f2 or something like this, now I have checks like this. So the king actually would have to step up. I just didn't see a perpetual, unfortunately. But the king would have to run here, and I'm not totally out of the woods. It's not like I've held the game or anything, but this is practically speaking a difficult position to win, because I have a lot of checks. I still have this b pawn. Not that it's going anywhere fast, but it's just not quite over yet. So I should have gone for this type of position. Unfortunately, I didn't, and I went for bishop d5, trying to block the queen from getting to the d8 square, but it just doesn't get the job done because of this move, bishop f6. And the issue now is that I have to worry about queen a7. So after queen a7, f7 would be hit. And additionally, I can't go back to g8 because I just walk into the mating pattern with mate on h8. So the bishop cuts off my queen from the defense. And to add insult to injury, I don't have any checks. My queen has no checks. There are no dark squares my queen could take advantage of. So here, I actually went bishop takes f3, thinking, you know what, this is the even better version of the last position with bishop takes f3 because the bishop is on f6. It can't participate in defending the king from check. And unfortunately, I missed a very important detail, which is after bishop takes f3, there's queen d8. And it's just a mate in one threat. And the issue is that I need to get perpetual check or I'm going to lose. And unfortunately, I only have one check here, which is queen f4. And queen f4 would actually be stopped by g3. And note, my queen can't get to d2 with check because the queen on d8 is guarding it while it threatens the checkmate of its own. So actually, after queen d8, I actually resigned because I saw that I only had one check and then that wasn't sufficient. Very disappointing game to finish. I mean, I thought I was in it, especially after my pretty bad opening. I thought that, again, this knight d7 move, which allowed queen d4, was ill-advised. I probably should have started with queen c7. And, yeah, I mean, it's just a tough game to lose, especially when you kind of are defending for a long time. You know you're not quite lost, but like one mistake is going to get you over the edge. And, I thought I had it together, but it is what it is. So anyways, I end the 4 draws in a row with a loss. And, trying to rebound in the next one. All right, so that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, please like the video or subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, you could support the Road to Grandmaster journey by making a donation through the description below. Thanks. Have a good one.